Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft Politics. My name is Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Andrew Percy. Nice to see you again, Joseph.
We're both back in Vancouver, which means we get to record at an hour where I feel a little bit less guilty about day drinking than an 8 a.m. start. What do you have? What are you drinking this week?
I am on a Mountain View, which is the Sweethearts IPA. I've had it before. They're based in Hope. Hope, BC, and I've been to their brewery before, but I've never had this in a can. What are you drinking?
I am drinking Wayback Brewing. It has a citrus wheat here that I'm drinking. What's interesting about Wayback is they're a pretty new brewery. Yeah, and there are not many of those these days in BC because it's a very tough business to get into, particularly with things like, cost of aluminum going up by 50% or more. So Wayback opened up, give or take, less than a year ago. They are in Surrey or closer to South Surrey, so they're up the street from me. Really good pizzas, and I visited for the first time like 2-3 months ago and really enjoyed their beers. So yeah, it's just sweet.
I thought you lived in White Rock.
Well, I say White Rock.
That's what you tell everyone. But you live in South Surrey, right?
Where I pay my property tax is to the city of Surrey.
Are you a bit of a snob? Yeah. Is that what you are? Are you a snob?
Well,
You're here I am on a podcast. I live in White Rock.
I'm about to share some tasting notes on a beer that I'm drinking in the middle of the day. So yeah, I might be a little bit of a
snob. Yes. I was thinking, I'm in a glass, which is actually a glass from an American brewery, and I was like, that's not really acceptable at the moment because of obviously everything going on. But then I realized, you sent me that article yesterday, these cans have all come from the US. Not a single can, these 16-ounce cans, not a single can is produced anywhere in Canada. So that's crazy.
Which is insane to me.
Goes to this whole point about boycotts, right? I've always thought boycotts are a bit questionable because what is an American product? What is a Canadian product, right? This is Canadian beer in an American can. It kind of demonstrates the connection between...
How interconnected we are, yeah. But the aluminum may come from Canada, but it's got to go across the border for processing, and it's going to come back across. So an interesting article about this in Canada. I think it gives you and I an excuse to maybe go talk to some brewers and maybe have them on the show and talk about the impacts of these trade wars.
And also drink beer.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a really good beer. I just quite like this. I gave this a 4 when I had it in the brewery. Good. What are we talking about this week?
Well, I think we're going to get to, perhaps it'll be a little bit of a therapy session for you and I, given the state of the polling numbers in Canada. But before we get to that, I thought it might be fun to share some mailbag, some comments that we've been getting on our YouTube. So if wherever you get this podcast, if you're on Spotify or on YouTube, you can absolutely leave us comments. We do read them. And we're going to try and occasionally share them here on the show, talk about them, and maybe, who knows, down the road, we'll give you an ability to email us a voice memo. But for now, I thought, Andrew, we could look at what some people have been saying about us, because some of it's been positive, some of it's been a little bit, edgy.
People don't like you, is that right? I mean, I can see that. I mean, I'm not sure I do, to be honest. But
we'll see. You may recall you made some comment about, I think it was the episode when you had your Yorkshire tea. You had in that episode, you were making fun of me for potentially having some, free trade, well-roasted, delicious coffee that you assumed was some sort of snobbish choice of drink. And someone replied and said to you, Yorkshire Regular is better than Yorkshire Gold. Mm-hmm. Secondly, no one gives a shit that you think somebody's being pretentious about drinking coffee. If anything, you're the one being pretentious about Yorkshire Gold.
I bought Yorkshire Gold because it was the only thing they had in the store here. I normally drink Yorkshire Regular. I'm quite happy with it. I wasn't being pretentious. I drink a good cup of tea. You drink a cup. Look, when I was in London, because I was all fancy la-di-da, I went and had a banana bread latte. I had a banana bread latte. It was about £9.50, but I had a banana bread latte.
$18 for Canadians.
It was, well, not now. I mean, it's like now about 25, right?
Yeah.
It was, so, I can be pretentious too, but I actually am a Yorkshire regular, so I wasn't being snobby having Yorkshire Gold. It's the only thing I had. I'm quite happy, but Yorkshire tea is just excellent tea, and whoever that person is, I don't care, because I'm going to drink my tea. They're probably having an oat milk soy latte right now and going, it's probably. So offended. I'm so offended. Right.
You'll also recall in one of our episodes when we're talking about Pierre Poilievre's pivot to his new branding, Canada First in French, Canada d'abord. And I corrected you because it sounded like you said d'abord. Not your fault. Yeah, you have a pretty unfortunate accent when you're trying to speak in French.
I'm a pretty unfortunate accent when I try and speak in English.
Despite my correcting you and telling you it's d'abord, someone else replied to that same video, and just in case you weren't sure, Andrew, they said, it's not d'abord, it's d'abord.
D'abord. Right, okay, thanks for that. I mean, first of all, my French teacher always says I have a very good accent, so I'm not sure whether being lectured by people who speak Quebec French on how to speak French with a proper accent is really appropriate.
You could probably be more functional in France than I could right now. So
well, they'll put subtitles on you. So
yes.
So we call that sous-titres en France.
Yes,
but you know. For you, it's probably it's probably right in the nose, right? I can't do the accent, so I should just get cancelled now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm very sorry I said it wrong, but you know, it is my second language.
What else here? Some people have been, some Americans particularly, have not taken well to what we've been saying about Trump. So a couple of comments here. A person who goes by the name of Free Angel 5221, when we were talking about is Trump getting too cozy with Putin, he believes, I shouldn't say he, this person says, he's not ponying up to Putin. He's giving him the respect he deserves as a leader of a country. Mm-hmm. Europe stopped being our allies long ago. You've done nothing but use us and abuse us. Now it's time for you to deal with your own defense. You don't deserve us as an ally anymore.
Well, Free Angel?
Free Angel 5221.
You're a fucking idiot. I'm sorry, but for a start, Putin is not a leader of a country. He's a dictator. He doesn't get elected. Adolf Hitler was a leader of a country. Saddam Hussein was a leader of a country. Lots of people lead countries. You don't respect them if their behavior on human rights, on democracy, and on their neighbors is as appalling as it is in the case of Russia. And actually, never mind what he's done to Ukrainians. Think about what he's done to marginalized groups in his own country, in Russia, right? You think about the LGBT community. You think about, democratic opponents, people who have dared to question him. That's not somebody who deserves any respect. And as for this nonsense that we've done nothing but use and abuse the US, I'm sorry, but we're allies, right? We for a start, the UK, if I'm thinking from a UK point of view, buys more American products to support American jobs than we sell to the United States, right? It's British troops, and it was Britain that was one of the first nations out after September the 11th, along with Canada and the whole other host of countries in Europe, right, who gave their blood in defence of America. And yes, America's given its blood in defence of Europe, because guess what? That's because we're the same people. We're allies. We share the same values. We are members of the Western Democratic Alliance. So we aren't using or abusing either party, right? On either side, we're friends and we're allies. And it's a time some Americans woke up to this, because, I find it absolutely incredible what's happened to that country in terms of so many people buying into this nonsense that somehow Europe has abused America or Canada has abused America. Fair point, right? We've certainly taken too much. America's taken too much of the burden of defense. I think I've said that repeatedly. Whether you call that abusive, I don't think that's necessarily fair, but it's also benefited America in many ways. But there are legitimate issues there. But anyway, he's an idiot, so don't listen to it again.
Yeah. Someone else wrote, and their handle's too long for me to read it out, but this is a slightly more, I think, constructive viewpoint, and I think this is one you and I have agreed on in some way, shape, or form. But this person wrote, how many times do we need to tell our freeloading friends that enough is enough and to pony up your fair share? Trump told you this last time he was president, and what happened? Not much. Now you're still complaining, but not coming up with money, armaments, and manpower. So here we are. So I think that is something you and I have largely agreed with. Yeah, we do think there's been a little bit, if not too much, freeloading from America's allies for too long.
Yeah, the only point of contention I'd have there is I don't think 637, I think it is, dead British personnel in Afghanistan and Iraq going to war alongside and to support our American allies counts as freeloading. I'm not sure that counts as freeloading. And similarly for the Canadian soldiers who were killed in Afghanistan supporting our American friends and allies. So I wouldn't call that freeloading, but certainly in terms of has Europe been paying its fair share to defence? No, lots of countries haven't been. The UK has. It's paid the 2% that's required. Obviously, the US pays a lot more, but also gets a big economic boost from that spending as well. Let's not forget that, right? A lot of jobs in America are supported by that, and from around the world too. But yeah, I think we've been completely open in the past about, that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. We also got a really nice note from Tina1642, who says, I know you guys are conservatives, but I like that you're not insulting my intelligence by having a fair, highly analytical, and balanced perspective about Mark Carney, no conspiracy theories or silly slogans. And it's a much longer comment, and this person shares their perspective about Mark Carney. Maybe we'll come back to that later in the show. But
is that Tina?
Yeah, Tina. So yes, we do appreciate the nice comments.
Free Angel can piss off. Tina, it's nice to have you with us. But also, I think we are. I think we're reasonably minded conservatives. I can always see the other side of the argument, right? I mean, things annoy me about.
Later, you're not going to talk about what we think the conservatives might need to do to turn things around. That might piss off some of our friends in conservative circles, right? But that's what we're here for. We want to hopefully have a slightly different take on the political situation than others. Last thing I'll say is Farouz sent us a note in response to last week's episode, just their own observation. Before Trump's tariffs, there was a clear winner in the next election. However, now it is a close race. Yes, it is indeed a close race. So why don't we pivot to talking about
absolutely
what we are dealing with right now. So it is funny. Andrew and I had to do doing a presentation later this week, and we included sort of seat projections. And literally 24 hours ago, that graph had the Conservatives projected to get the majority of seats in the House of Commons in Canada. Today, on the backs of two fresh polls, that's changed now. The Liberals, as of right now, are projected to get more seats. They are projected to get a larger share of the popular vote. And it is a massive sea change that, I suppose we've been we've been running our way to this in the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks. And I will give you credit. When the polls first started turning, I remember you messaged me and you said you were feeling it in your bones. You feel like this could go somewhere. And I was like, come on, don't panic. It's just one poll, right? It might be an outlier, but it's not just one poll now. It's been poll after poll after poll for weeks. And the pendulum has swung now in favor of the Liberals.
Yeah. I remember messaging you about that. I felt it because I've lived this, right? I remember living, I think I've mentioned it before, the 2017 UK general election, where all of a sudden everything just switched. The Conservatives had been 20 points ahead. Theresa May. I remember a woman hanging out of a window when I was campaigning in Scunthorpe at the beginning of that campaign. And she said to me, yeah, I'm voting for, I should know who you're from. And I said, I'm from the Conservatives. And she went, no, I'm voting for Theresa May. And I said, yes, she is a Conservative. She went, oh, yeah, well, that then. And within a week or two of that, everything changed. So from people hanging out the windows, not even knowing it was the Conservatives they were voting for, it was that Theresa May, to then being the Conservatives almost losing that election. And every message that had been successful for the Conservatives about Jeremy Corbyn, who was the Labour leader at that moment, every negative ad, every message that worked against him stopped working. It just stopped working. And the more we doubled down on it, it made no difference. And that was why at the beginning of this, when I saw the Conservative response to the Trump tariffs, which was to continue attacking Trudeau and then Carney and the Liberals, it just, to me, struck of that, these things are not working anymore because the public has moved on from them. And, of course, I had debates with Conservatives. Some of them told me I was completely wrong and that what was really needed was more negative ads and to spend more on that. And I just didn't think that would work. It just didn't sit comfortably with me because I just thought I've seen this before when the public just kind of moves and what worked previously stops working. And
the movement is quite measurable now. So the Leger poll that came out yesterday, sorry, we're recording this on Tuesday, March 18th, so it came out on Monday, March 17th. If a federal election were held today, 42% of Canadians would vote for the Liberal Party led by Mark Carney, while 39% would vote for the Conservative Party. Something else I noticed in here, nearly half of Canadians, so 46%, hold a favorable view of Mark Carney, while 28% have an unfavorable opinion of him. You compare that to Pierre Poilievre, Conservative leader, 39% of Canadians have a favorable opinion of Pierre. 49% view him unfavorably. So look at those two numbers again and look at the unfavorables. 28% unfavorable towards Carney, 49% unfavorable towards Pierre Poilievre.
Yep.
That is a problem.
First rule of politics: don't attack a popular figure.
Right.
So when you are less popular than the person you're attacking, don't be surprised if your attacks on that person do not work. Right? This is a basic rule in politics. I don't know why people fail to understand it. And by continuing to attack it, you're not reinforcing any of the negatives on Carney. You're reinforcing the negatives on yourself. As hi, this is the guy. It's
I just find the right balance though, Percy, on that, because like yes, also like another rule of politics is define or be defined, and perhaps Pierre Poilievre now needs to start redefining himself a little bit. We'll come back to that, I think, in a second. But,
yeah.
But sometimes it is effective to hit your opponent early, define them, go after them hard, and maybe the party, the Conservatives, felt that he wasn't as popular, or at least his popularity was.
Well, he wasn't known, right?
Right.
So he wasn't known. But I think ordinarily there may be some merit in that. I think the difference this time was it's tied very much to what's happening south of the border and the Trump tariffs, and the concern I had in those early days was anything that was an attack on Trudeau or on Carney would be seen to be an attack on Canada. Because it's, hey, these are the guys who are going toe to toe, and we see on TV, using very strong language against our current enemy, which is enemy. It's very sad to say that the Donald Trump administration in the US, and they're attacking him. And a lot of people go, actually, none of this makes sense. So I think those attacks are blunted. And of course, there are, all parties do it, and you have to point out the negatives of your opponent. I just didn't think this was, to somebody who was unknown, I just think that was a bigger risk, because you're starting from, when somebody's known and they have, a level of negativity, you're kind of, it's like a virus attacking an immunocompromised body, right? It's going to be more successful. But actually, him being unknown was a big advantage to him in this. So these attacks are just kind of water off a duck's back at the moment. And I think it's that uniqueness of the situation south of the border.
Yeah, and also the ballot box question. So, I think we've been saying on the show for the last 2-3 weeks, perhaps even longer, that right now the ballot box question is clearly who's best fit to take on Trump. Yep. And the Leger poll found that between Carney and Poilievre, 42% of Canadians think that Carney would do a better job managing the relationship with the U.S. and President Trump. They also feel Carney would be best suited to grow Canada's economy, 45 to 31%. No surprise, they think he would do more for the environment. But here's what I find interesting. On the issue of making life more affordable for Canadians, 37% for Carney, 32% for Poilievre. That is one of the core issues Poilievre has absolutely owned since he became leader of the Conservative Party, is the issue of life affordability. And right now, he's 5 points behind Carney on that same thing. And then the only thing that might be a silver lining in here is, on the other hand, Carney is also seen by Canadians as the one more likely to raise taxes. So I read all this out because I think it'd be interesting, Percy, for you and I to just apply our own assessment on this. Like, what do we think Pierre Poilievre needs to do right now? And before you and I get into this, I think it's important for us to know we've been in war rooms. You've obviously had to campaign yourself. It's very easy for us to be armchair quarterbacks and to have a perspective from the outside. We don't have all the information that those in the war room do. So we're going to have this conversation, but it is by no means an attempt to shit on the people that are working really hard and on either the Liberal side or the Conservative side. But sometimes, what we experience on the outside is important. So
I normally hate people like us, right? Because if they don't do as we say, we can very easily say, well, if only they did, and it would have all worked out right, which it may well not have. I just think on some of that data you just went through, I do wonder whether, because the biggest threat on cost of living is probably now seen as the tariffs, the fact that Carney is seen as better on dealing with the tariffs probably filters through to him being seen as better on dealing with the current cost of living issues. So maybe that explains that, given that previously the carbon tax and all these other, and inflation had been very definitely hung around the necks of the Liberals and to Pierre Poilievre's advantage. So I don't know, what should the Conservatives do? Look, I completely conscious of what you've just said there. And I think it's easy to sit here, particularly after a few swigs of beer, and be the kind of Dave at the end of the bar in the pub who knows everything about everything. But I do think that I've watched them try to breathe life into the carbon tax issue, and they've now turned it into this: has he really got rid of the carbon tax, and industrial carbon pricing is still there? I'm not sure that's going to wash. I mean, maybe they've got internal polling that says something different. I don't think at the moment, if you're a Canadian voter, you're thinking very much about industrial carbon pricing as a threat to your pocket in the future. I think probably much more what's happening down south is a bigger concern. So I'm not sure that's going to work.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, I mean, you now look like potentially you're coming off as if you might be protecting industrial interests. And I don't know how much the average voter cares about industry. Industry is a vague term, and you're now getting away from a pocketbook issue. And I think I can understand where they're coming at it from, because presumably the Conservatives have the data and the polling numbers that show that they are seen to be better equipped to actually provide tax spending relief to Canadians, even if right now Carney is inching very close on Pierre on that front. They figure a message in which they are going after taxes and wanting to cut taxes is a good one for Pierre to be on. I think that is right, but it might be time to move on from the carbon tax. Carney has taken that off the table, and you can get into the minutiae of whether it's actually off the table and is there such thing as an executive order in Canada, so on and so forth. But once
you're into the details, you've lost.
You're losing, right? Once you're explaining, you're losing.
And actually, by talking about it, every time you talk about it, the voter is reminded, because of the coverage, that he has taken it off the table. Taken it off the table, right? So you're actually doing your opponent's favour for them. And I think on the industrial pricing as well, I do wonder whether we know from our own polling at Crestview and research that a lot of Canadians have a antipathetic view of big business. So there is that potential risk there. I think to your question about what should they do, look, again, all the caveats we've just gone through, but I would have thought that a good pivot, and something I think they should have done from the beginning actually, is hang on, let's remember these are the guys who have been in power for the last 10 years. In this fight with Donald Trump, we are weaker as a result of the decisions they have made. They weaken the Canadian economy because through things like carbon tax and all the rest of it, you could argue. Other people may have a different view, but they have. We've seen weaker economic growth. I think the weakest growth in the G7 or something similar to that. They have put us in this fight in a diminished position because of the decisions they have taken over the last 10 years. And alongside all of that, by the way, you can't get a house. Crime is out of control. I just walked back here from a coffee shop and, of course, middle of the day, saw in a nice bit of Vancouver 2 or 3 people smoking crack pipes. So these are the guys who have failed to address all of that. So why, having messed up, arguably the health system, although that's provincial as well, why, having done all of this, weakened the country, made us weaker in this fight, would you now put these people in charge of dealing with Donald Trump? You do not reward the people who have put us in the position we are in and the relative position of weakness today by rewarding them with re-election, because these are not the guys who have proven that. And also, by the way, can I just add to that? My other point is that also these are the guys who've spent 10 years telling us we should be a bit embarrassed about being Canadians and about Canada. So really, this wrapped themselves in the flag all of a sudden. I'm not sure this is for real. Now, that's a very hard message to distill down, but I do think you can do it.
But don't you feel Pierre Poilievre has been doing that? I wonder if the difference or the problem or the challenge he might be facing is one of tone and one of at least appearing to be agile enough to adapt to the situation. Because the way I look at it is I think if he was clearer about demonstrating a Team Canada unity front on the external threat, to say, hey, I'm aligned. We're all on the same team. We're going to fight external threats together. And on that, I do not need to go out and pick wedge issues and go after my opponents. But here's where I will go after my opponents, because it's one thing for us to be prepared to deal with external threats. But in order for us to be strong, we need to be strong at home. Right, we need to, domestically, we need to sort a lot of stuff out, and we are dealing with some significant challenge that are going to get in the way of us being strong against the external threats. We do have massive debt spending levels, high debt to GDP ratios. We do have the crime issues. We do have affordability issues. So yes, we need to do what we can, united front on the trade war stuff, but we also have to tighten our bootstraps, and we have to become a powerhouse domestically again. And I've got the plan to do that. Boom, 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 boom. I think it's one of tone and it's bridging, right?
And maybe the space for that would have been created had he done a, kind of, we're going to stand full square behind the government because this is a moment of existential threat. But know this, these guys have weakened us and we will hold them to account, and Canadians should hold them to account for their very many failings, right? Which there are very many, as you can always say of all governments, right? At the election. And that's where we'll have the fight. And we won't stop and we won't apologise for reminding Canadians about how they've weakened us. But right now, personal attacks, division are not what Canadians want. And therefore, we're not going to go down that route at this point. Now, look, similarly, that may have failed because people might then have said, well, actually, you're letting the government off the hook and all this. So, again, the risk of being armchair experts here. But I personally, that was where I felt things should have been at the beginning, of give the support and then do the whole, but we're going to hold you account for these failings. And that time will come, and it will come at the election, and we will be unrelenting in holding you to account for why this country is in such a weakened position vis-a-vis the United States in this fight.
It's such a small thing, but even the way you've just said it there, I think it feels so different, and it feels very appropriate for the moment. It's like, okay, yeah, good. You're going to you're united, you're with us, we're going to go on the external threats, and now when the time comes, you're going to hold them accountable as they should.
You will be held to account.
Yeah. You will be,
And, I mean, that may not have worked, right? So who knows? But I do think I just have watched, as an observer and thought, this just makes me uncomfortable from the very beginning of the response. That's not to say I am a Mark Carney apologist either, right? Because maybe we'll come on to that in a moment, because I have very strong opinions on this too, which I'm outraged about.
I said this last week. I think I've said it the week before, and I will say it again. So let's actually turn to Mark Carney. I'd like to suss out where we think he's at risk, and I still hold this view that he is not an experienced campaigner yet. He doesn't know what it's like to be put through that kind of crucible, and this is where I think the difference. Like, we could see the polls course correct to where they were 6 or 7 weeks ago, because I'm not so sure Carney has it in him to withstand the crucible of a full-scale campaign. We've seen that he's barely a few days into the role. He went abroad, and in a series of press availabilities with media, he demonstrated that he gets very snippy when he's put under a line of questioning about his blind trust. And it's actually not the first time that he's become snippy like this with media. He actually apparently has a record when he's the governor of the Bank of England of getting quite snippy with reporters. And so, that's not a good look, that you are now a public office holder. You are going to be asked about questions that are of public interest, and you don't just get to he questioned the motive and the intent of the journalist asking the question.
Look inside yourself. I mean,
look inside yourself, he said to her. He came across
asking questions
like a total grade A asshole in that media veil.
Asking questions, and for people who perhaps are listening in Britain or America and didn't see this, he is a very wealthy man. I did joke with somebody that when he went into the palace to see the king, he probably looked around and thought, well, this is a bit of a dump. It's probably not what he's used to. He's a very, very wealthy man, very successful. I have no problems with that. But obviously he's had to put all of his money into a blind trust. But the information of what that is, I think, doesn't vest for 120 days. So during the period he's prime minister, unelected, and through a campaign, nobody would be able to scrutinise, I think, that
yes, and he's the one who knows what's in the blind trust.
Yeah. So when he's asked about it, he gets really sniffy. And, I just thought it was incredible the way he responded to that. But also, it was, as you said, it was the tone of just I am a kind of above scrutiny.
Well, there was also an element of, and he then, after questioning the reporter's motives, and being really snippy about it, he then puts himself on this pedestal as if we should all be thanking him his commentary was along the lines of like, I've decided to do this in the moment of crisis. I'm making myself available, as if we should all be thankful that he fucking put his name. He hasn't even put his name on a ballot yet, so I can't even say that.
I have agreed to be prime minister. It's,
we should all be thanking him already.
Thank me.
Fuck off, dude. Call an election, and then you earn the right for me to say you're my prime minister. But we'll get to that in a second. So I do think he's extremely vulnerable in a campaign environment of imploding and really leaving Canadians with a bit of a foul taste in their mouth. Someone could say, well, Joseph, Pierre Poilievre always picks fights with reporters. And to which my answer is that, yeah, but that's part of his brand. And the brand that Carney has put forward was his boring technocrat who is going to do politics a very different way.
And there's a difference, right? Because when Pierre picks fights with journalists, it's like, he's accusing them very often of having a bias, and he's calling them out on their question from a biased point of view, as opposed to Carney, which was how dare you at all even question whether I'm a good person, and how dare you question the fact that I'm incredibly wealthy and whether I could have any possible conflicts of interest. It's like, I'm above this. That's not what Pierre does. Pierre does I'm challenging you, a reporter, because you don't ask the Liberals these questions. You're trotting out Liberal talking points. I think that's much more, it may not be my style necessarily, but it's much more legitimate than the kind of I'm above reproach kind of thing. But that said, though, let's be honest about it. For all of that, when he's on that stage, he looks very comfortable, as much as it might annoy me, and he does look, kind of prime ministerial.
And that, I think, is
very annoying.
That part is, I think, what ultimately is where he can be either successful or where he can fall apart. So he looks prime ministerial, and he already, as a result of that, I think, has a massive advantage over Pierre Poilievre because Carney gets to say he is a prime minister, something Pierre hasn't been able to say yet. And he's looking the part. He's on the world stage. He's doing the role. And so one concept that a friend of ours threw at me yesterday, and I was like, oh, that's actually a really interesting sort of theory of how he might run the campaign. Because I was making my point. I don't know that he can survive a campaign. He's up against a 20-year pro who knows at a campaign. He's very vulnerable on this. To which my friend said, well, maybe he actually won't campaign. Yeah. Maybe what he'll do is he'll call the writ, and he'll just spend the entire writ period being prime minister, like doing the stuff that the prime minister needs to do right now with all these issues. And then you're going to have the contrast of a guy who is prime minister, focused on getting the job done, versus an opposition leader who's going to be attacking him unrelentingly. And if the mood remains the way it is with Canadians right now, then the risk is going to be that that might be the right call. Like that might be like one of the rare campaigns in Canadian history where you may not need to campaign. Yep. And so maybe this whole environment plays to Carney's strengths so damn well, and maybe he's not at risk. I don't know.
He's not required to make himself available to the media. He's not required, to be out on the stump, right? When we saw, Biden managed to win election to president of the United States by hiding in a basement. So it's perfectly possible that he does that. I mean, I don't whether Canadians would stand for that. I mean, I don't know at the moment. It's just we're in a very interesting state of flux at the moment, and also it's important not to overstate the fact, right, that the Conservatives can still win this election. If you look at where things are, although the polling has continued to move away from them, which is the concern, unless they can abate that, then this could become and that's. Could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, but at the moment it's still the outcomes of minority Conservative, majority Liberal, majority Conservative are still finely balanced. But the performance of third parties will be important in that, like the NDP, which we haven't talked about.
Well, before we move on to the NDP, I will note that I think it was the Angus Reid data that came out also on Monday. One of the numbers was the resiliency of the support. And so this is where one advantage the Conservatives do have is that their supporters are much more committed to them. So I think if the Conservatives can become, if they can really deploy their ground game and their get out the vote operations, then they might still do very well, and they might outperform expectations. I also think it's always better for Conservatives in Canada to not be seen to be so far ahead because you need your base in Canada to feel motivated to show up, and you want that. It's easier to do that if it's a competitive race. And so I say ground game is a huge factor in here that we're going to have to keep a close eye on in the election. One of the reasons why I think that's even more critical is that Dan Arnold made this point with us on last week's show, that the fact that, at least in the leadership race, Carney had very weak Quebec numbers. Like in terms of absolute people who who logged online to vote, his numbers in Quebec are very weak. If that is representative of what to expect from the general population, if the Liberals do not do well in Quebec, it suddenly becomes very difficult to chart a path to government, right? Because the number of votes available in Quebec are so huge.
Yeah, but you saw what the numbers were in Atlantic Canada, like this massive turnaround where there were strong Tory leads now to like 60% Liberal. Leading in Ontario, the Liberals 47%, and even in the Angus Reid poll, leading with 39% in Quebec. But if they do underperform in Quebec, that won't be to the benefit of the Conservatives. So the Conservatives can only really form government if they have a majority, because they've no dance partner otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So I still, whether he underperforms or not, that doesn't help the Conservatives towards a majority.
Good point.
I mean, Western Canada is a bit more resilient, but even there, I mean, the figure in Alberta, in Angus Reid, I think was 31% Liberal in Alberta. I think in the sub, I think actually Saskatchewan was the strongest Conservative province at 62%. But you think in Alberta, the Tories were down into the 50s, which is just unthinkable considering where it was just 6 weeks ago, even in Alberta. So anyway, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot data at that level and provincial level, because the sample sizes are small, always has a big margin of error as well.
Big margin. But the one thing that is consistent across all these polls is that Canada's third party, the NDP, is nowhere to be seen. I think the Leger number had them at 9%.
Or 11 or something was it? I can't remember, but maybe that's the average now.
And so it's a total collapse of that support. Obviously, I think we know what's happening. Those voters are now moving and migrating over to the Liberals, possibly motivated by Carney, obviously. I mean, it's not like the NDP had large numbers to begin with, even when Trudeau was prime minister and everyone was ready to move on from him. And so the NDP just has a larger issue. If these numbers hold, they're going to have a hard time in the next, coming out of the next writ.
And people outside of Canada may not appreciate this, but the NDP propped up the Trudeau government, refused to bring the government down last autumn. And had they done that, they would have been in a position where it was not impossible that they would become the official opposition. I mean, it remained unlikely, but certainly potentially could have jumped ahead of the Liberals to have been the third party, with the Liberals possibly even in fourth place, right? And they chose not to do that, and they have now screwed themselves royally.
Which is ultimately the story about, I think, that we're going to have to explore coming out of the campaign. Dan Arnold mentioned this with us last week, which is heading into the Liberal leadership. All that party wanted was someone who was going to prevent a total collapse of the party. They'd be happy if they held on to a couple dozen, 30 to 40 seats. Now, if this holds and if it translates into actual seat by seat counts, then the Liberals, it'll be a fight between the Liberals and the Conservatives who forms government, with the other one being opposition. And that is for the NDP a catastrophic result for them, as far as I'm concerned. And we have
and here in BC, that's really interesting, right? Because the NDP were polling second, big Conservative lead. Liberals now tied with the Conservatives in BC. Suddenly, all these constituencies that were that were Conservative NDP fights, some of those, if you look at the numbers, could go Liberal. It's actually crazy to think like they could pick up seats from the NDP, or seats that the Conservatives were nailed on to get because of that collapse of the NDP vote, where you have the Liberals in a strong third place at the last election. Suddenly you factor in a collapse in half of the NDP vote, which seems to be happening in this province as well. The Liberals actually jump ahead and take those seats. So it's
changing at incredible rates. And then the big caveat, of course, is it's one thing to have these types of numbers in polls. It's a totally different scenario for that to be translated at the ballot box.
The only poll that matters is polling day, Joseph, as all parties say when they're behind in the polls.
That is.
Anyway, right, this is supposed to be a short episode, so we should stop ranting.
Yes,
it's been 43 minutes of us ranting so far.
Well, it's been ranting. Good exploration, but anyway.
I'm about to rant, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, you have a rant? Let's do it, and then we can get into our tasting notes.
Right, so I just, sorry, but I put something up on LinkedIn about this. There's nothing unconstitutional about a Prime Minister, changing during a mandate. There's nothing unconstitutional even about a prime minister not being a member of parliament. Even in the UK, that's any Westminster system. I think that's generally conventionally not done, but it is still possible. However, the bit I'm absolutely furious about, and I don't understand why more Canadians aren't, is fair enough. He could win the Liberal leadership. The Liberal Party can say to the Governor General, this is our new leader. But he has not been required to recall Parliament and prove he can hold a majority in the House of Commons. That is the basic convention of a government in the Westminster system is, can they command a majority in the House of Commons? Trudeau could until he prorogued Parliament, and that was bad enough because he probably couldn't and prorogued Parliament to save his party, save his own skin. However, he had previously at least proven on numerous votes that he commanded a majority in the Commons. This guy, of course he's entitled to become Prime Minister under our system, but the bit that's missing is him then being told, however, you must now submit your government to the House of Commons, and if you can't win that majority, then an election will follow, right? He's going to call an election anyway, but I just find this completely outrageous. So he has turned up in Europe and in the United Kingdom this week as the Prime Minister of a country, having never been tested in the elected chamber of this country that he can command a majority, which is the underlying principle of centuries of Westminster government, that you must be able to maintain a majority and command a majority in the House of Commons to be Prime Minister. It's outrageous. Never mind whoever the individual is, whether they're a good Prime Minister or a bad Prime Minister. This is just constitutionally outrageous.
Yeah, it is. It is. I agree with you. This is really irking me. I had a conversation with my wife about this yesterday. She's much more sanguine about these things, but we also are of different sort of political stripes. It makes me so angry to think that there's a person trotting around the world calling himself the Prime Minister of Canada who is allowed to do so, as you say. Like there's no law being broken here because there is no legal precedent. Like there's no legal. This is not illegal for him to be doing it. We do have though a bit of a convention that is an exceptional circumstance for someone to. It's only happened once before. Where the Prime Minister of Canada was not an active or sitting member of Parliament, or immediately wasn't seeking a seat in the House of Commons, because, like, it should be a bare minimum requirement of the job that if you're going to be a Prime Minister, you have to have a seat in the House of Commons. You need to be held accountable in that respect. And so it makes me really angry that we are doing.
You sound it. You sound like you're furious. Wow, God, that was on the wrong side of your expressions. It really calm down a bit. Whoa, calm down. I'm thinking you're going to start throwing things. You were so angry. It's like, my word.
It's like very Canadian response to mine.
Yes, I'm really angry about this.
I'm very angry.
I'm so upset about it.
I think I'll become exceptionally angry if this becomes more than like a week-long thing, right? Like, the House of Parliament's supposed to resume next week, and so I assume he will call an election before that happens, so that he could then go earn a seat in an election, and then if he does win, fine, fair game. He's got a seat in the House of Commons. He's earned it. He's gone through the crucible of an election campaign. But I think it's horseshit that we don't have some kind of sort of constitutional requirement that the moment you become Prime Minister of Canada, you must demonstrate you have the confidence of the House.
That is the convention.
Before you can move on.
It is. I mean, like even
I know, but trigger it. Like now we're like this like in between period. The House isn't sitting, and it's just absurd to me that the scenario can even play out the way it has.
And people go, oh, it's exceptional segment. No, in World War II, when Churchill replaced Chamberlain, Churchill went before the House of Commons and was able to demonstrate he commanded the will of the House, a majority in the House, right, to form the new government. This is just like the fact that Parliament, absolutely, as I said, he can become Prime Minister, but the fact that bit hasn't happened, I just think is
But it's outrageous. Also precisely because these are exceptional circumstances that we need to ASAP get to a place where our Prime Minister has a mandate that he or she has secured from people. So exceptional circumstances dictate we should be in election as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange to think that Vladimir Putin has had more votes cast for him. I mean, they may be dodgy votes than the current Prime Minister of Canada. And actually, it's interesting. If you were Trump, advising Trump, you know, what a field day you could have with this, which is like, oh, I'm not going to meet this guy. He's not elected by anybody. Dictator. You know, he's a dictator. I mean, you know, if you were wanting to be mischievous about it, so like, you know, I don't meet unelected leaders. You know, I don't meet dictators, that kind of thing, right? I just don't understand why more people are angry. But I'm angry enough for the whole of Canada. So
I have been getting some messages from friends, casual observers of politics in Canada, and asking me, "How is this possible?" So I do think it's those who are attentive to this or noticing it or perplexed by it. It's one of those where I think they'll forgive it for a week or two max. But if this becomes a thing, then he's going to quickly lose public support, which is why I think ultimately we are heading into an election.
April 28th is the smart money, right?
Okay, well, why don't we close it in final tasting notes on our beers now that we've been sipping them for a good 45 minutes. I'm really enjoying this. It is an unconventional take on a wit ale, so it does have some sweet orange peel spices to it, but you do get just a delicate note of like a citrus style hop. So really bright, flavorful. And so if I were to do a blind taste testing of this blindfolded, I don't think I would have known it was a Belgian wit style beer. I'm pretty sure I would have said it's some kind of hopped Pilsner with a lot of flavor in it. And so in that respect, I quite like it because it's a really nice sort of afternoon, warm weather type beer. So I think I'll be coming back to this one during the barbecue circuit this summer.
Excellent. And I would definitely recommend this. I could have, if I was blind tasting, could have thought it was a bit of a fat tug. It's like a slightly sweeter fat tug, but it's a proper
caramel malt sort of background.
Yeah, it's like malty, but that kind of piney, florally, bit of spice. It's just peppery. It's a proper nice, West Coast, Northwestern, Pacific Northwest ale. So IPA. So I am very, very, very much a fan of this. And actually, I like this brewery because Mountain View are the little glasses we use, the 5-ounce glasses. I bought lots of them years ago to take back to London to use for our beer club in London. And when you joined the beer club in London a few weeks ago, that's what we were drinking from Mountain View Brewery, which I think it's Hope, BC. It is actually a very nice beer. I would give this a 4.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Which is what I gave it when I had it at the actual brewery.
Nice. Well, if it holds up still in the can, then that's a good sign, because I always do find that beers are just that much better at the brewery.
True.
Also, did you notice a couple of weeks ago we did a little test to see if our beer club friends were noticing that I was at least drinking out of a Verdant glass that they gifted us at beer club, and we're going to see if we got any feedback on it. I've heard nothing. So those fuckers are not listening to our podcast.
No, I heard something because last week we did it from London, and I took one of the beers that was left in the fridge there from the beer club, and one of beer club, Andrew, did message me to say this morning, I haven't been able to catch up. I think he's been running. He's like you, does exercise and all that lot. Anyway, and he said, "Oh, I noticed you had the beak," and he was quite disapproving of that. So somebody's listening, but the others, they're just fuck them. Who do they care? We don't care. We don't need them. We've got what was he? We've got
Tina,
Angel. What's his face?
Lovely. And we have Free Angel 5221.
Free Angel 5221.
We take it back. You're not a fucking idiot.
No, he's not.
You're a friend.
Like, you don't deserve us as an ally anymore. Yeah. Fuck's sake, man. Come on. Seriously? We've fought in wars together. We've been there for one another. We're on the same side. We're friends. Come on. Just send us another message and I'll take back telling you to fuck off if you just understand that, we are not friends, we're allies.
There we go. All right.
And if not, fuck you. I'm not. You've made me swear.
This is how we do community building, eh?
I'm a well brought up lad from Hull. It's we don't use bad language in Hull. We're as it's like the Mayfair of the north of England. It's we just don't use this language. We're normally doing little Latin quips, a little bit of ancient Greek, and all that. That's not true.
I have a hard time believing it.
Yeah, good.
That is a wrap. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you haven't already, do subscribe to us. We are on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so we can keep popping up in your feeds.
Bye-bye.